What you were saying, like seeing the transformation in your husband, like I've talked to countless people, like going back to your parents' story, like your mom said she was going to church, then your dad went right away, but that's not a lot of people's stories. Like they might be going to church for a while and their spouses aren't going with them, and that's something they pray about, but oftentimes it has a trial that comes along that brings their spouse closer to the Lord. It could be a diagnosis of themselves or a family member, like a child, like your all circumstance. Like I have somebody close to me that they had this fire recently that like threw them for a loop, and she had like started going to church for a couple months. She wanted to for a long time, and finally she's like, okay, I'm just gonna go. And then when that fire happened, right, this tragedy, her husband came to her and he was like, I think God's trying to get a hold of me. Like, I'm going to start coming to church with you guys. And that was just a huge praise, because that's something that we have been praying over for years, right? And so it's just encouraging to hear that. And it's never just say the husband's an unbeliever or doesn't want to be a part of the church or doesn't see that as a priority. I'm just using that as an example. It can be either spouse, but I've never heard it be like the wife's so naggy that she gets her husband to come to church. Like, that does not work. Especially for men, like that is not going to work. And he even talks about like, I think it's in the Proverbs, like a nagging wife is just as bad as like a dripping faucet.
Right.
Which is funny, but like that is not going to work in your marriage. Like it has to be like they see the fruit of what God's doing in your life and giving you that peace that surpasses all understanding and everything. And that is when they are drawn closer to the Lord. And, you know, as a couple drawn closer together. So I've seen the analogy of like a triangle, which we've had it explained, or we went to a wedding this past weekend and they were saying for his sister's wedding, they had like a unity candle, and they like, you know, at first they were holding it, you know, across from each other. They had two different candles holding across, and so they were further apart. But then when they got higher and like, for instance, getting closer in your relationship with the Lord, that is when the two of you grow closer, and, you know, ultimately, first and foremost, grow closer to the Lord. So it is a bonding thing, having that relationship. And if you're not married yet, like, try to find somebody who is a believer that you're going to be equally yoked with. Again, using that analogy of the yoke.
Yes.
That is a scripture in the Bible, but that's not everybody's story. Like sometimes the one spouse becomes a believer after they get married, or they get married to an unbeliever, which is fine, but like it is going to come with more struggles, right? And that doesn't mean God's not going to bless it, like when you both pursue him, but keep praying. There's so much power in prayer, and don't freak out when like something really hard might happen in your life, like you shared, because that could be God's way of drawing them closer to him.
Yeah, or even just building their faith. Like, you know, if you think about it, there are a lot of couples that both attend church, and you know, they may go through the motions. And really, I think it just takes like you said, like one big thing to kind of open your eyes and be like, wow, there's something here.
Yep.
There's got to be something to this. You know, and I just think it really is eye-opening, and you know, it does. It's really hard at first because I know for me, I felt like, is this going to destroy my family?
Yeah.
You know, am I going to go through this and then also destroy my family?
Yeah.
Because it felt like that.
Yeah.
And I remember actually, you know, this just came to mind, and I hate to dwell on our story, but so there was a time where it came that she possibly was going to have a second surgery, like later. She was like a year old, and you know, it was kind of like really heartbreaking because we thought that we were kind of over that, at least for the time being. And we went in, and so the doctors actually allowed me to go in with her, because it was something that like I was going to have to help do at home. So they wanted me to see it. So we scrubbed up, went in. Of course, they put her under, and my husband was in the waiting room. And I remember prior to this, like, I kept telling him, like, I just, God's going to take care of it. Like, I just feel like it's going to be fine. And, again, I've had this peace for a while.
That's awesome.
And we went in and they put her under, and she was down for like maybe 15 minutes. And the doctor was kind of like, we don't have to do anything. This is fine. I was not expecting this. She's totally fine.
Wow.
Like, let's just let her come out of sedation. Like, congrats, Mom, that kind of thing. And so we went back out in the waiting room, and my husband was sitting there, and he just kind of like looked at the doctor, and I was like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Is everything okay? And he just was like, don't have to do nothing. And this is something that really, really stuck out to me, because my husband looked at me dead in the eye, and he was like, I believe you now.
Wow.
Yeah, like,
that gives me chills. That's awesome.
And it just was really like a good feeling for me to know that, it wasn't all not worth it, and that it helped him in some sort of way, at least,
For sure.
And by no means are we perfect. We all fall short and stuff,
Yeah,
but just
nobody is.
knowing that he's witnessing some things through me is a really awesome thing.
That's so great. I
Yeah.
love hearing stories like that. So what do you know about God now that you didn't know before walking through these valleys in your life?
Honestly, I would say that he does never leave you. I mean, I know that was pounded in my head,
Yeah.
but I never really had to experience it. So I think by experiencing something that tremendous and that big, and the transformation that came from that, I now know. And I feel like now I'm to the point in my life where, like, no matter what I go through,
Yeah.
and there are things that are a lot worse than what we went through,
Right.
but I just truly feel, like I said, I have this just like ever going peace about everything.
Yeah.
And that was probably the greatest gift he could have given me, honestly.
Awesome. Yeah.
And so I feel like that's just what I truly know now. Like, there's no question. And, I said I questioned a lot growing up.
Yeah.
And it took that for me to really know.
Yeah. And I just want to tell people, like, it is okay to ask the questions and, like, just pray. As long as you're not turning from God when you ask those questions, just say, like, God, meet me in my unbelief. Like, meet me where I'm not sure. Just, like, reveal yourself to me. And, like, he will do that through his word, through other believers, like, through just spending that time in prayer with him. And I also want to go back. So we talked about, just in case anybody's like feeling skeptical. So when we talked about the story of Saul, and like God did, turn his back, because Saul kept turning from him. His heart was hardened. So if you're at that place in your life and you've kept turning from God, and like you aren't believing in him, you're wanting to take your own path, and you feel like God's not with you, all you have to do, like, read the story of the prodigal son. He ran from God. He did his own thing. He wasted all of his inheritance and all this. And, like, his father welcomed him back with open arms when he humbled himself. His dad didn't go chasing after him. Like, he was there. He knew where his father was if he wanted to go back to him. And that's what I would encourage you to do. If you have turned from God, like, turn back to him, pursue him, like, and he is there with open arms for you in that circumstance. Yes, life might look a little bit different. Like, there is always circumstances for our sin and for our rebellion. Like Saul, he was no longer going to be king because of all of his rebellion. So there is going to be that part, because God is a good and loving father and wants what's best for us. So there is consequences. We know that as parents.
Yeah.
If we didn't love our kids, we wouldn't discipline them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the same concept.
So yeah, so just keep that in mind. But also, like, I think of the verse how, like, he left the 99 sheep that were there to pursue the one. And so, yes, if you've gone astray, like, it's never too late to come back to him. And, like, that's when you experience that blessing on your life. And we talked about it in the last podcast with your parents, but the verse like he will work all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So even in those trials in life, like if you love God, if you're called, following that calling in your life according to his purpose, he does good in your life. Now, like, it doesn't say that he's going to do good in everybody's life. Like, if you are living your own life, if you're, like, living a sinful, like, life against him, like, yes, we all sin. But if you're actively pursuing that sin and not caring, God's not going to work all that together for good, you know? But just remembering that second part of the verse, I just felt like anybody who might feel confused by those two things, that is my best way of explaining it all. So what encouragement would you give to someone who is walking through a hard season and just feels like they can't do it on their own?
I would say just don't give up on God. And I know that sounds very cliche.
No, but that's so true.
You know, people say that all the time, just don't give up. But it's true. And a really good song actually came out right about the time is that song by Brandon Lake, like Don't You Give Up on Me.
Yes.
And that
That's such a
really,
good song,
yeah, that came out and it was like a game changer for me.
Wow.
And honestly, like to this day, that's just kind of how I live by. And, you know, in that song, he says like, open your heart, open your eyes, open your eyelids. And, you know, I think that's so true because you're going to receive those blessings. You know, if you just don't give up on him. And it also says in there, like, I've heard every last prayer you've prayed. I answer it all the time. And you just didn't hear my reply.
Wow. Yes.
Like, I think that's powerful.
It is.
And, you know, it's so true. And it just goes back to like looking for the answer of your prayers and something that just might not be what you wanted initially.
Yeah.
You know, and I think people, they struggle with that because they're like, well, I've asked for this and I've asked for that and it's just not happening. And I'm like, that might not be what he wants for you.
No is an answer.
Yeah,
like,
no is an answer.
Or not yet. Like, I think people forget that. If they don't get their yes, they're like, God's not even listening. Is he real? Like,
yeah, is he real? Is he there? Is he, you know?
But I think as good parents, sometimes not yet is an answer. Sometimes no is the right answer because we love our children and we know better than them, and God knows better than all of us. Like, he is all knowing. So he sees the future that we don't see. He sees the healing in your daughter that you did not see initially. He sees the salvation of your husband that you did not see. But in those first stages, you're like, what in the world are you doing, God? Like, this is terrible.
Yeah, this is terrible.
But he is all knowing and he works all things together for the good. So like, and the good is going to look different than we've thought. And so that was a huge shift in my life when I learned like that no or not yet was an answer. And some things that he calls us to is not, think of David's life again. He anointed him as king years before he ever became king. So sometimes like God will lay something like fostering and adoption is something that God has laid on our hearts. We went through the classes years ago. We did everything and then God put a stop to it. And like, we were like, well, what in the world? And then we found out we were pregnant and we were like, okay, it wasn't God's timing. That's still, I think, a calling on our lives. We just don't know when.
That will be, yeah.
So, yeah, and that can be in a lot of different scenarios in your life. Like, it might just be a not yet, or it could be a no. But don't question, like, God's existence, because don't throw a fit like a toddler would, you know. I think we can sometimes be like that. Like, we don't get our way, so we're so angry. And that's how we both have toddlers. Like, they can get like that sometimes.
They definitely can.
Because they don't understand.
They want it right then and they want it now. And, you know, and I think that once you can start to realize that and to look at things a little bit differently, it all changes.
Yeah.
Honestly. You know, if you're in like a medical diagnosis or, you know, anything you can think of, the loss of a job or the loss of a loved one. You know, I think if you really think about it and look for them, you will find small little answers to prayers.
I agree.
If you just kind of like they say, look outside of the box.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. That's great advice. So how has all of this, you've already shared some of this, but if you want to share any more, how has this really grown your relationship with the Lord?
Yeah, I think, in short, because we've already kind of went over it. In short, it's been like just confirmation for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's no questions anymore.
Yep.
And I don't feel like there really ever will be.
That's
as
the
far
point that I've
as
gotten
far
to,
as
too.
like existence or there may be questions again as to why are we doing this or what are we going through? Why are we here? That might come up, but for me, it's just that confirmation. And just knowing that he's there and he hears and he listens.
Yeah, that's so great. And I've learned that like I pray for clarity a lot in my life. And I'm stubborn. So sometimes like even for starting this podcast or, different avenues things that he's asked me to step away from, that's even harder than starting something new. Like I'm so productivity driven. Sometimes I like take on too much, I'll be honest. But when he asked me to step back for something, like I need usually, like, I know it might sound silly, but God a lot of times gives me clarities, and like it'll be 3 different things most times before I'm fully like, okay, God, I hear you, I see you. But things like that, just praying for clarity, and God gives it in crazy ways, have the eyes to see that, like those circumstances have made me believe in him even more. And like I'm also to the point now, like I'm not going to ever question God's existence because I have seen him in such tangible ways of answering my prayers, like with no's or no's or yeses, whatever it might be. But yeah, just praying for that makes a huge impact on your life. So what was a point that you knew that God was calling you to open the daycare in our area and being able to serve the community in that way?
Honestly, when I think about it, I can't find like a specific time that I knew. It just was kind of like, it was just there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if mom and dad talked about this in their podcast, but of course they have the education background. They've had
Yeah.
it for years. But something when I was really small, what they wanted to do before they even got into that and what their heart was in,
Yeah.
they wanted to open up a daycare.
Yeah.
And I remember actually going to places and looking
Wow.
because they were ready to
Yeah.
like actively do it. And it never panned out.
Yeah.
And so they jumped in the school system and, kind of stayed there because that's what God wanted them to be doing at the time.
Yeah.
And it goes back to there's a reason and there's a timing. It might not be right now. It might be not yet.
Yeah.
And so all this stuff happened with Josie, and I made the decision just because even though we knew it wasn't spina bifida, there were still a lot of, I don't know what her life's going to look like because
Right.
there were a lot of things that could have been affected. I made the decision to not go back to work full time after I had her, or at least put a pause on things. And then, that I had her in December and mom had her stroke in January.
Yeah.
So
That's a
that
lot of
that
hard
was
hits
that was a
and
lot of hard hits in a short amount of time. And again, timing. It worked out that I was home a good bit, or when I did work, because I worked at the grill, and they have been so great to me.
They're amazing
They are
people.
amazing people. They've been such a staple in my life. They've always been there for me. But I was able to pick kind of and decide when I could work and when it didn't work out for us. So I was able to help take care of mom a lot.
Yeah.
If I would have been working, 5 days a week full time, it wouldn't have been that way, and
Right.
it would have been a lot more difficult on us. So we did that for a while, and there just came a point, and actually, my father-in-law was the one that kind of initiated things. God bless him, but. So down where we're at, that used to be the place where the Mennonites gathered for their youth
Yeah.
program, and they had some thoughts about pursuing their own building and things like that, and he was sharing that with me, and I had been there several times to know what it looked like, and I
Yeah.
always thought, wow, this would be such a great
It's a great
daycare. It's a
location,
great
too, yeah.
location. It's all laid out right, and he just kind of was like, well, what do you think? You want to do it? And you know what? And I think that might have been I said I didn't remember a time, but I think that might have really been where I was like, wow, that maybe I should do something like that.
Yeah.
I called Dad immediately because they were in a time in their lives where they didn't know where they were going next.
Yeah.
He was still working in the school system, but it really just wasn't working out. And I called him and I said, I feel like this was thrown in my lap.
Yeah.
And I said, think about it, pray about it, because at first he was like, no, kind of laughed it off. He was like, yeah, it would be a great daycare. And kind of like laughed it off a little bit. And I said, just think about it, pray about it. I could not do this on my own. Like, I need you to help me, and I can't do this without you. And it wasn't but a few days later, he called me.
Yeah.
Which I didn't really know if he was taking it serious or not. And he
Yeah.
called me and he said, let's do it.
That's so awesome.
And, they had really been praying, about like what they were going to pursue with Mom. And Mom's always kind of been like, like where do I go now? Like, I know I'm not meant to just be here. Like, I know I have some sort of purpose. And she just was like, this is it. This is why. This is my why.
And what a beautiful